G'day from Australia. My name is Ashley Davis. Welcome to my coding live stream. This is recorded live, but will be available on YouTube later for anyone to watch. You are watching me build a full stack application from scratch, and I'm doing my best to explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. You can see my handle on the screen now. Before we start coding, I want to begin with the tradition that we have here in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So I'm doing this series of live streams to support the development of my book, Rapid Full Stack Development. You can see the webpage here at rapidfullstackdevelopment.com. Rapid Full Stack Development will teach you the tools, techniques, and processes you need to be a developer who creates reliable and valuable code quickly. In this series of live streams, we're building the example application, Photosphere. You can find more information about it on the webpage. Photosphere is an application a user can upload their photos and their videos to for storage, and then to view them later in a photo gallery. Today we're starting to work towards the front end, and over multiple sessions we're going to build a complete web-based front end for the Photosphere application. It's going to look a little bit like Google Photos here. You can see some pictures of my cat. What we're aiming for in particular here is to have the photos nicely lined up along the right-hand edge. Something that's a little bit more difficult than you might expect, but we're going to work through how to do that, how to figure out how to do that. If you've missed the previous live streams, you can find them on YouTube. This is my YouTube channel, Code Capers. If you click on playlists here, look for the Rapid Full Stack Development playlist and click on View Playlist. You can see all the live streams I've done previously. So previously I've worked through a number of sessions building out a first pass of the back end, and I'm going to be putting more videos into this list as we work through building the front end. You can find all the code that I'm writing on GitHub. So look under the organization Rapid Full Stack Development here. So far you'll just see a couple of repos for the back end, and starting today I'll start to upload the repos on the code that I'm producing in this series of live streams, building out the front end for Photosphere. I'm just going to switch over to my terminal here. I am working on Windows 11, but I have Git for Windows installed, which gives me a bunch of Linuxy style commands like ls. So most of the commands that I'm going to be using are going to work on any platform, whether you're on Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. It should all be okay. I have node.js version 16 installed, and what version of Git am I on? 2.36.1. So we're working towards a photo gallery and a video gallery as well. Before I do any coding, I like to think ahead as to how I'm going to test it. So how would I test something like this when I don't necessarily have complete functionality? Now in the last series of live streams, I built out a back end for this, which I can upload photos and which I can retrieve a list of photos. That's great, but it's a little bit painful to have to kind of upload the photos one by one to generate the data we need to test this, and it's just a complicated step really to make a front end and immediately connect it to the back end. What I can do here to make things simpler for testing though is I can actually generate a list of photos. I can just generate a random list of photos. That's what we're going to do today to get started with. Is all I'm going to do is make a little program that can generate a random list of photos using the Unsplash API, I should add. And that's going to be the test data that powers much of our front end development until we connect our front end to the back end. So I'm going to be using the Unsplash API. I heard this was good. I had a bit of a play around with it already. And the process I went through was just really going to their developers page, clicking into view documentation. First thing that I noticed was get a random photo. So like that was exactly what I wanted. I want to basically get a list of say 30 random photos and then have that in a JSON file that I can then use for prototyping my photo gallery. So most of what I needed to know to do this, I learned just by kind of reading through this doc here. It was fairly easy to get up and started. I had to learn how to authenticate with Unsplash. I made an account for myself. Anyway, from the documentation page, there's like a whole bunch of documentation for getting started. I've already created my app, so it's a test app here that I've created for this live stream. And down below, I've got some like secret keys that I'm going to be able to use to access the Unsplash API and get back random photos. First though, we should create a project. So even though I'm working towards front-end development, I'm using just some node.js coding here and JavaScript just to basically generate some test data. So I'm not doing any front-end coding yet. I'm just preparing some data for my front-end prototyping that I'm planning to start very soon. So let's make a new directory and we'll call it random. Let's call this random gallery generator. We'll create an empty Node.js project here using npm init-y. So npm is the node package manager, and we're just using this to create like an empty project with no dependencies yet. So that creates a package.json file that you can see in the directory there. It's just what was printed out, but you can, if you do a cat on that, you can see the contents of that. It's just the metadata for our project, and later on the dependencies. Well, let's get a dependency in there straight away anyway. I know I'm going to need Axios to make it easy to do API requests for Unsplash, so let's install that. So I'm installing the Axios package from npm. I know how to use this package well. If you didn't already know how to use Axios, you would look it up on npm Axios. You would load it up on npmjs.com, and here you would see some documentation and some examples of how to use Axios. So I don't need to look at that. I already know how to use Axios. I use it almost every day. Now I'm going to open this in Visual Studio Code. So I'm opening the project in VS Code, my IDE. I'll just line up VS Code next to my terminal here so I can see what I'm doing in both. I'm going to quickly create an index.js file. So this is the entry point for my application. If I wanted to make sure that everything was working and everything was set up with Node.js, I could just write a quick hello world program and run that from the console here. So I've got my hello world. I don't need to maintain that. Now this is the first thing I really need to kind of access Unsplash is I need to get my access key in. So I've created this test application just for this live stream. I've got some access keys here. I'm going to delete this straight away after the live stream so no one uses my account. So I've copied the access key. Back at the terminal, I'm going to set that in an environment variable called access key. Actually, to make it a bit more descriptive, Unsplash access key equals that. Now, if I was on Mac OS or Linux, I would do an export. Sorry, got to lowercase that. But I'm on Windows, so I need to use the set command instead. So just make sure you use the export command if you're on Mac OS or Linux. The first thing I want to do is just make sure I can access that environment variable from within my code. Just going to copy the name out so I don't have to type that. So I'm taking from the process object, I'm taking that environment variable, and I'm just going to console log that. So let's just run this again. Yep, and so we're printing that out. So we know we can get our access key for Unsplash into the program. And it's just always a good idea just to do a console log on whatever data you're working with, just to make sure your data arrived in your code successfully. There's so many times you could make a mistake and, not set the environment variable or like set it to something wrong and not really realize that. But this helps you understand if you've done something wrong at the outset. Now, this is just really just kind of for prototyping and testing. I'm not going to save this code. I'm not going to keep it. So I'm not going to follow any of my normal kind of rules of coding when I'm writing code today or for several sessions in the future when I'm going to be prototyping. It's all essentially throwaway code. So I'm going to spend minimal time making the code nice and elegant and pretty or whatever. I just got a job that I need to get done. And then when it's done, I'll move on to the actual proper coding of the front end, where I will use my proper rules of coding, and it'll be nice, nicely refactored and clean and tested code. But at this point, I'm not worrying about any of that. It's just real hack and slash coding, get the job done as quickly as possible. So, but I do want to get live reload working, just because it's going to be really useful to see the results here. Normally, I'd save nodemon as a dev dependency, but because I don't really care about this code, I'm just not bothering to do that. I'm just saving it as a production dependency because this code is never going to go to production. So I don't have to care too much about the quality of this code. So now I can just quickly run nodemon under npx. So npx is a command that comes with Node that we can use to run local packages. So I'm running nodemon against index.js. This means we've got live reload. So I can be coding now, saving the code, and the programs are going to automatically reload. The next thing I want to do now is in the code, I'm going to be hitting Axios. So I'm going to import Axios. And if you want, Yeah, I mean, you don't really have to do this, but you can just print out Axios to make sure that the thing got imported correctly, and you'll see like all the functions and variables and stuff that are available on the Axios module. Pretty cool. You can pass almost anything into console.log in JavaScript, and you'll see something useful come out the other end. Okay, so let's go back to the Unsplash documentation. I might just put that side by side with my code. Okay, so we're just in the Unsplash documentation here, and I've been through this already, so I kind of know how to use this already. But just for your benefit, for the viewer watching, I scanned through this documentation. One thing that was useful was the public authentication, because when I went there, that immediately told me that I need to provide an authorization key, and that what the URL is and how I pass the key, how I can pass that access key up to Unsplash. And then from there, I can rely on the documentation to get me whatever else I want. Let's get this in. Let's get this URL in the code anyway. So I'll copy that over, and I'll call that my base URL. So that's where I'm going to be making my API requests for random photos. This is another bit that I need here, and I'm just going to copy that across so that I remember it. I'm just going to comment it out because it won't be valid code. But that's what I need to add on the end of the URL in order to authenticate. Now let's find that documentation again. So one thing that's useful here actually is I'm just going to open getting a random photo in a new tab. And that way I can kind of have my root level documentation all ready to be accessed there without going sort of backwards and forwards in the browser. So let's say random photo URL equals the base URL. Get rid of that slash so we don't have an extra slash there. I'll put the slash there. And then it's photos/random. Now, at this point, this is where I can append my access key. I'll put that in there. Of course, I can't just use your access key. I have to actually plug in the access key that I created when I created my Unsplash app. And now, again, you don't have to take it for granted that you've structured this correctly. You can console log it, and you can kind of see what the result is. So let me minimize the documentation here. So you can see here it's already reloaded, and it's printed out this API request, or this URL, sorry. The photo is random, and it's plugged in client ID on the end. I'm going to make a request to this now and see what I get back. Like, you can do this without even reading the documentation. Obviously, if something goes wrong, we'll have to go back to the docs and find out what it is or how it is that we're supposed to use this. Before I do that, I'm just going to make an async main function here to wrap up my asynchronous code, and I'll call that at the end so to catch some if any error occurred. In here, I'll just to make sure this is working the way I expect, I'll just put hello world quickly. You can see there the code reloading automatically on the left, printing hello world. That's all good. Now let's make the API request. So we'll pull the data out of the response. We're awaiting the result, and we're going to use axios.get, I hope. Random photo URL. And hopefully this is all we need. This is going to print out the data for a random photo. Cool. So that's how easy it is. I mean, the hardest bit really is kind of learning how to authenticate and sign up to Unsplash. But then we can get back this random set of data for a random photo. You can see there's all sorts of information here that is going to be useful to us in making a photo gallery, like the width and the height. We've got URLs that link to the image, the raw image, the full version of it, and smaller until we get to say thumbnail. This thumbnail is what we're going to display in our gallery. And then when you click on the photo, it's going to bring up probably the full version or maybe the regular version, depending. And there's a bunch of other information here that's specific to the Unsplash API. Oh, there's EXIF data. That's always interesting because later on we might want to import kind of properties of the photo, and also the location, which is kind of cool. Like eventually we might want to display the location of where this photo was taken on a map, and Unsplash gives us that data. So you can't make a photo gallery out of just one photo. We need to figure out how to get multiple photos out of this. And your first thought might be to use like a for loop, where you're saying, start off at 0 and while I is less than like 30 photos, move along one each time. This would work. I think it will get us. Let's just check it anyway. So that's going to print out like 30 datas for 30 photos. Now we'd have to kind of add that to a list, and then we want to write that list out to a JSON file. There's a slightly more convenient way of doing this without actually using an explicit for loop. And I noticed this because I was in the Unsplash documentation, and I just happened to notice down the bottom there's a count field, and it's the number of photos to return. So it defaults to 1, and the maximum is 30. So that's like perfect. Like if I just tag on this count field or this count query parameter to my URL, I can get my 30 photos in one shot. Let's try that. I'm going to add a count query parameter here, and we'll actually make a variable, and we'll call it photos, if I can spell it right. And we'll plug that into our URL as the count query parameter here. See that, how that's been plugged into the URL. And now this should have already run because I've got live reload on. And you can see here, at the end it's an array. In order to see what's happening here, let's just change the number of photos to 2. So we'll get back 2 photos. You can see here, I mean, there's still a lot of data here to scroll through, but you can see here the data that's being printed out here starts with an array. And so we've got our first kind of data record for our first photo starting here. And then where's the next one? Here's the next one. So the curly bracket here is for the next photo number 2. And then we've got an array bracket here that closes the array of photos. Okay, so the last step really for today, to complete this little kind of mini project here and get this kind of data dump of random photos, is to write it to a JSON file, which I'm then going to use in multiple other sessions of live streaming going into the future in order to prototype and bring this photo gallery up from nothing. Now I'm going to use the node.js FS library. That's the file system library that comes with node.js. It allows me to write a file. So I could just do it like that, but I actually want to use, because I'm using async await, I actually want to use the promises version of write file. And what are we going to write this to? Let's a file name in the current directory. We'll call it gallery.json. So that's the file. You can see I've got like the documentation automatically being just sort of displayed as I'm typing this, which is telling me like that, that was the file. Now I'm onto the data here, and the data is just that data object that I've retrieved from the Unsplash API. Oh, but it's in JSON format. So the other thing I've got to do here is I've got to stringify it. And what I like to do with stringify is pass in a number 4 for that third parameter, which gives us four space tabs, which makes the output JSON a bit more readable. And of course, because I'm awaiting the result of a promise-based operation here, I need to use the await keyword to await the result of that asynchronous operation. I'm just saving that. It's running. There's nothing being printed out on screen now, but if I look in my project directory here, I should now have a gallery.json. You can see here the code's actually got into like an infinite live reload loop, because it's constantly outputting a new gallery file, restarting itself, outputting a new gallery file, restarting itself. That's something I didn't think of. I'm just gonna quit that. But anyway, we've got what we wanted. We've got a JSON file here. Let me zoom out so we can kind of maybe get an idea of what this looks like in its entirety. So it's there's 30 photos in here. So it's a fairly large file. Hopefully you're getting the idea there. There's a lot of JSON data in this file. So how many lines? Oh, we've got just under 3,000 lines of JSON data here. You can fold these down. So you can fold down each record if you want to go through and kind of check them and make sure the data looks okay. I'm pretty happy with it so far. So that's pretty much a wrap for today. So I've got a bunch of data here for random photos. This is going to be the test data for my gallery that I'm going to be coding up in the front end of Photosphere in future sessions. So this is the Rapid Full Stack Development Organization on GitHub. And after I finish this live stream, you'll be able to find the code that I've just written here. So come back and check if you want to have a play with that code for yourself. You'll need to make your own Unsplash login and application and have your own access key. But then you'll be able to play around with that code and try it for yourself. So thank you so much for listening today. This has been in support of my book, Rapid Full Stack Development. Please check it out at rapidfullstackdevelopment.com. I'm going to be back live streaming again in 48 hours. So keep an eye on my Twitter or my Twitch account. Follow me on Twitch if you want to get notifications of when I go live. And I will be back in 48 hours.